Happy Monday. It's a new week. Hope you all enjoyed your Hanukkah. Hope you're all enjoying the holiday season. A few days from Christmas. A Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night. Well, the New York Mets, not such a good weekend as first basemen are flying off the board, and they still have a hole at that position unless they consider Jorge Polanco to be their full-time first baseman, which I don't think should be the plan, but who knows what David Stern's plan is at this point, because we're all just guessing. We're all just talking rumors. But guess what? None of us have a damn clue, except Will Salmon maybe, who I want to talk about later in the show. But who knows at this point? As first basemen continue coming off the board, we're nearing the end of the calendar year. You know, I said last week it feels like something's coming. It does feel like any minute now something is coming, either at first base, outfield, pitching. It just feels like with names coming off the board, the Mets have to pounce soon. And I know a lot of people are losing their minds. But, you know, I've been the one to preach patience here and believe in Stearns. Well, I think now's the time. This is the week. I know it's the holidays, but now is the time that he goes and gets something done, because with more names going, there's less names that are intriguing that are available. You're watching Mets Daily. I'm Jake Brown at Jake Brown Live. Make sure you follow me on X, Instagram, and on TikTok. Subscribe to my YouTube at Jake Brown Live. Make sure you subscribe to this YouTube today. We will hit the 3,000 subscriber mark, so we'll have a celebration tomorrow on Tuesday's show. As we hit that mark, we are just, as I record this at 9:40 a.m. Eastern on Monday, December 22nd, 3 subscribers away from 3,000. So thank you so much for keeping that subscribe. Keep sharing the channel with any Mets fan you know. And, of course, keep leaving those comments. We're reading them every day all off season long, so getting you all involved on the program, appreciate that. Thank you so much for the support, and we will keep on riding along this whole Mets offseason, having you covered. Thanks so much to Wardy for joining us on Friday. What a fantastic show and conversation. Hope you enjoyed that on Friday. So thank you so much to Wardy. Check him out as well. Well, Wilson Contreras was a name that we all, I think, were thinking about. I know I was when that was rumored that the Mets were talking to the Cardinals. Well, that is out the window. Wilson Contreras has been traded to the Boston Red Sox. There goes that potential, I wouldn't call it dream, but would have been nice to have Wilson Contreras be not only just a first baseman that's a pretty good glove. You know, he's only played first for a year, but he did it really well transitioning from catcher. But, hey, if Francisco Alvarez were to have gotten hurt, that gives you the option to put Contreras back at catcher and then have Jorge Polanco play first. So I thought Contreras really gave you a lot of options, but the Red Sox deal wowed him, I guess. They give away right-handed pitchers Hunter Dobbins and prospects Yoiker Ferrardo and Blake Aida. So good for the Red Sox. You know, they pounced on it, and they got the deal done. The other part of the deal is Contreras and agents at Octagon negotiate an extra $1 million bonus for Contreras to improve the trade, and the veteran's contract includes a full no-trade clause. The Cardinals included $8 million in cash as well. So that was an intriguing layer of the deal. The remaining $42.5 million, that's $8 million eaten. Boston's commitment is $34.5 million. So not a crazy commitment for a veteran, a World Series champion, a good defensive player. I thought Wilson Contreras would have fit in fantastically, to be honest, in this Mets clubhouse. He is a dog out there. He's much better defensively at first than Alonso. I know he's not a great hitter, but he's a good enough hitter to play every day at first base. And then he does spell Alvarez. If something happened to Alvarez, something happened to Torrens, you have yourself a third catching option that's a better hitter than both of them. So I really thought Contreras would have been a fit, but he goes to the Red Sox. Now, you know, the talk around town, and, you know, I think there's something to it, is that the teams want more from the Mets, it feels like, than other teams when asking for a trade. And this wasn't a crazy return. It was a good return for a guy that, you know, they were trying to get rid of, including number 24 prospect in there. Dobbins, remember, who said he would never want to play for the Yankees. Like, if there was anyone left and it was only the Yankees, he wouldn't do it. It's an interesting trade, but it feels like the Mets would have had to given up Sproat and others for this, and that's not equivalent from what I've heard from people who cover prospects and cover this sport more than I do. It wouldn't be equivalent to what the Cardinals gave. It would have been an overpay. So you wonder if that's what the Red Sox were asking for. We don't know. It hasn't been reported. You know, I wish it was. I wish we would know this kind of stuff, because it would kind of help in learning if teams are really just asking the Mets for a lot more than they are for other teams. But it's a good move for the Red Sox. And, you know, the other move that happened, another name off the board, is Munetaka Murakami 2 years, $34 million. He goes to the Chicago White Sox. And, it's interesting. Murakami, we didn't hear any rumors of where he might go. And out of the blue, he goes to the White Sox. And really, it makes sense. You want to talk about a guy going to a place with absolutely zero pressure. The White Sox are an abomination. I mean, they are just a terrible baseball team. He's going to have no pressure there. He could quietly have like a 30-homer season, and we may not even know because they're going to finish in the basement of the American League Central. So Murakami, if that deal is similar for an Okamoto, the Mets need to pounce. Now, I think Okamoto probably is going to get more because he's just more versatile and he's a better defender. Murakami's window to sign was ending today, so he had to go. But the Mets really should be in on Okamoto. They really should be going for him because, this is a guy that I think could play multiple positions. He gives you versatility. He can hit a bunch of homers. He's got some speed. I just think it makes too much sense for the Mets to not, to go after Kazuma Okamoto. So we'll see. But now the question is, the age-old question: who's on first? What's on second? We know what's on second is Marcus Semien, but who's on first for the New York Mets? And Okamoto's probably at the top of my list. If you want to talk free agent, who's on the top of my list in trade. I talk about him every day to the point I got to stop. It's Yandy Diaz. And I know he's not great defensively, but the offensive player and right-hand bat that Yandy Diaz adds to the Mets lineup would be absolutely massive. Wilson Contreras would have been that guy as a right-hand hitter. Yandy Diaz could be that guy. And we'll see. The Rays, remember at the end of our show last week, that 3-team deal of Brandon Lowe going to the Pirates, they seem open for business, and they have a first baseman, Aranda, ready to play there. So they don't really have a need for Yandy Diaz. He's got, potential 2 years left in that deal. It just seems to make too much sense for the Mets and Yandy Diaz if he's available. So I'm curious. I put out the trade of could the Mets do it? Some people called it an overpay. Mark Vientos, Jeff McNeil, and a Wenninger or Santucci for Yandy Diaz. Some people call that an overpay. To me, I don't think the Mets have a spot for Vientos. I think Yandy Diaz is a far better hitter than Mark Vientos. Now, Vientos could be better one day when he's fully developed, but I think if you want to win the next 2 years and bridge the gap to a Ryan Clifford, Yandy Diaz is your guy. Maybe it takes less than that. Maybe it's a Jacob Reimer, Luis Angel Acuna, and a Santucci. Does that get it done? But I'm sure the Rays are looking for young pitching after they just traded Shane Baz. They could use some arms, and they have their own pitching lab. So Okamoto, Yandy Diaz are the two names on top of my list. After that, you're talking about like a Ryan O'Hearn. I think that's probably the next guy in free agency. And then the name Mets fans don't want to hear is 38-year-old Paul Goldschmidt. But the reality is he might be the next name. So we'll see where they go. But Contreras and Murakami are off the board. A name that we continue monitoring, it feels like for the last years, Luis Robert. And reportedly, the Mets and Reds are the two teams in talks with the White Sox for a potential Luis Robert trade. Listen, I've been against it. I don't think Luis Robert is that good. I think he had that one great year, and since then he's fallen off a cliff. The more I've heard his name and the more we have mentioned him, I'm starting to become more comfortable with the Mets potentially making a trade for him, and here's why. One-year deal, and then you could buy him out. If he happens to have an incredible year like that year a couple of years ago, change of scenery, maybe a new clubhouse, he did steal 30-plus bases. He does play good defense if he stays healthy. I'm sure, New York City, the spotlight on him. Maybe that's something that reinvigorates Luis Robert's career. You have him for another year at $20 million, which isn't a crazy number if he puts up the numbers he did a few years ago. I'm starting to become more comfortable with it because at this point, I think we know what the Mets want, and that short-term commitments. They're okay with the high AAV if it means they're coming off the board in a year, and Luis Robert's that. If he does turn into that player, it's almost a steal. Now, what it will take to get him, if you're telling me it's Brandon Sproat and like a Wenninger, no. That's where I think I think the White Sox want a lot from the Mets, and that's why a deal hasn't got done yet. And like I said, I think teams are asking more from the Mets than they are from other teams, and that might be the Steve Cohen effect. And we knew the Steve Cohen effect would affect the Mets maybe in free agency with agents. They would ask for more money, but it feels like it's starting to happen in trades. And I don't know if you guys are noticing. Let me know in the comments below, but it feels like teams are just asking the world for the Mets, and David Stearns is like, no, I'm not giving you all that. So I'm fascinated if they get Robert, what's the return? If you told me it's Mark Vientos and Jack Wenninger for Luis Robert, I do it. Again, I don't value Mark Vientos that much. He's a DH. That's all he is. And he might go on and hit 30, 40 homers. Great. The fact is, he's slow as molasses, he doesn't have a high on base, and he doesn't play defense. So if Mark Vientos is only a hitter and does nothing else besides hit home runs, great, good for him. I don't think the Mets need that right now. They need more diverse players that actually do other things besides hit home runs. And that's why you're seeing the offseason that they're doing. They're not just going for home run hitters. In fact, they're not going for many hitters, period. But they're going a versatile player like Jorge Polanco, gets on base, who's switch hitter, who hits in the clutch. Like, they're looking for more factors than just a guy who hits a bunch of homers. So that's where I don't value Mark Vientos very highly. I think it's an addition by subtraction, to be honest, in that clubhouse with Mark Vientos. So I'm very good with moving on if it's Vientos for Robert and Vientos and Wenninger, Vientos and Reimer. I think the White Sox want pitching, though. So it would probably be a Vientos, Wenninger, maybe Santucci. I could live with that. I think it's a bit of an overpay. Again, Luis Robert, his ceiling, his value right now is so low. He has been brutal the last few years when you look across the board. Outside of stolen bases and maybe his defense, he hasn't been that durable, and his just stats have not been good. So I don't think it should cost a boatload. And if the Mets are eating all of that $20 million, it should just be Vientos for Robert straight up. Now, I think the Mets want to ask the White Sox to eat some of that. I think the reality is the White Sox have no interest in eating any of Luis Robert's contract, especially now that they paid Murakami. And they didn't pay Murakami a lot, but I think the fact that they paid Murakami makes them less inclined to eat part of Robert's contract. But if they eat part of Robert's contract and you're not giving up a boatload, I've stomached the idea of Luis Robert being a New York Met and hoping that he reinvigorates his career in New York. Because, listen, if he puts up 20 and 70 and he steals you 35 bases and plays good defense, I think you'll take that. Because, like I always say on here, 2025 was a black hole for the New York Mets in center field. They got no production. So if Robert could put up that production, you'll take it. But again, I'd aim higher. And one of the guys you aim higher for is Cody Bellinger. And he's a name that we continue to talk about. And I wanted to mention him today because Will Salmon at The Athletic, who has been the king of the Mets offseason in terms of breaking news and scoops. And, he goes back to Stearns, the Milwaukee days. So there's clearly a relationship and ties there. Like, we don't know his sources, but whatever he's doing, he's been brilliant. So we credited Will Salmon's getting a lot of credit. We like to eat a healthy piece of salmon for dinner, once or twice a week. We also like to stomach Will Salmon's reporting of the New York Mets. And Salmon wrote a column saying Mets should forego discipline and sign Cody Bellinger. And I'm with him here. I think this is a fan base that is craving a move. And Polanco wasn't big enough. These free, claiming Drew Romo, a eighth string catcher, and waving Brandon Waddell wasn't big enough. These signings, signing Weaver wasn't big enough. Devin Williams. I think Bellinger is the kind of move that gets the fan base excited because you have people giving up tickets right now, and I'm in the minority of the fan base who is encouraged by the future of the Mets and the number one prospects and the money that they do have. Like, it's not like they're not spending, but I agree that their roster is not great right now. Like, they are not a playoff team right now. I 100% agree with everyone who says that. Like, I'm not an idiot, but I think the reality is a Bellinger signing would give the fans a sigh of relief because it's like, all right, they're not just going totally stingy Stearns 2-year deals. They're going out and getting a player. And I understand that Bellinger's been inconsistent. I understand that the back end of that contract might end up sucking, but the reality is Cody Bellinger goes to the playoffs every year. He's a World Series champion, and he plays 4 positions. And I love that about Bellinger. He's clearly in a bunch of winning clubhouses. He knows how to win. And I like a guy who's been in clubhouses year after year after year that win because it means he's been to the promised land and he knows what it's like to go through ups and downs. A lot of these Mets players that are here, and the reason they got rid of this core is they don't know the ups. Outside of 2024, they don't know about the ups. They know a lot of downs, but they don't know a lot of ups. Cody Bellinger knows only ups mixed with some downs. But when you're part of a team every single year that has a winning record, you know what it takes to win. So that's not something to overlook with Cody Bellinger, and I'm full agreement with Will Salmon. The Mets should go after Bellinger. All right, let's close out the show today here on December 22nd with some of your comments from Friday's show. Michael says, you guys' show together was awesome and amazing. Thank you so much, Michael. Pat Smith says, nicely done. A thoughtful conversation about the Mets paradox. In the end, as much as may hurt to admit, Stearns and Cohen are on the right path. Edwin and Pete are arguably the greatest Mets to play their position. Nimmo on a contending team, solid left 7th place hitter. Something was wrong. Something is wrong. In this crazy time which we live, it's not absurd to imagine politics and social issues used to tweak political interests affecting the Mets clubhouse. maybe MF was on to something, Mike Francesa. Francesa's been around a wee bit. Stearns trying to build a team that competes every season. You can't do that signing six-place hitters like Kyle Tucker. As of now, weird players like Cody Bellinger that complicated swing for $300, $400 million. That's a great comment, Pat Smith, 7095. Like, people got to realize, like I've said, these are humans. Like, yes, the politics and stuff play a factor. And it's not just them. It's when they come home to their wives. And their wife is like, oh, Pete's wife was really a crock of, this, talking about this, or this person's wife said this, and I completely disagree. They got to deal with that and face these players in the locker room the next day 162 times a year, plus spring training, plus 8 months of the year. So just because they make millions of dollars doesn't mean the emotions and the things going on in the real world aren't playing a factor. And yeah, I never denied Pete and Nimmo were good players, but something was wrong and something is wrong. And I've said that all year. Like, Francesa might be watching Mets Daily because I've been talking about this all year. And yeah, I mean, listen, if Bellinger is going to cost $300, $400 million, no. And I think he might end up costing that. But I think if the amount of years come down on Bellinger, the Mets should pounce. Like, if it's 5 years for $150, similar to Alonso, I know a lot of Met fans are going to get mad and say, why didn't you just give the Pete that? Well, Pete doesn't play 4 positions. He's not a World Series champion. And he doesn't do the other things that Bellinger does. So if that's what the deal is, I think you pounce on it. But great comment there from Pat Smith. Alva says, Merry Christmas, Mets fans. Merry Christmas, everybody. All right, a couple more. Michael says, Merry Christmas. Stem50 says, love the way you calm the Fark down, Wardy here. He sounds laid back and sensible for a change. Wow. I don't know what the Fark means. Stem, we gotta. You edited the comment, but what is Fark? Let me know what that means. Phil Nolasco says, thanks. And he said, Wardy, you're the man. VC Money says, good show, gents. AG says, Wardy is killing it. Crypto says, and a happy Merry Christmas. Wardy, King of Mets ball. Wardy is numero uno. Yes, I love Uncle Steve, says Will White. Daniel says, let's see how the kids play. O. Isaac says, let's go Mets. Shakamoto, Mets Daily Insider member, says, I'm using my God-given privilege as a Mets Daily Insider to insist that you make Wardy reveal the source on that hat. Need the baby, Mr. Mets, swinging the bat hat. I need it. Thank you for the attention on this matter. I'll have to hit up Wardy on that. Let me know where he got that hat. I get asked a lot where I get some of my Mets hats. Sometimes it's people online who make hats. They just want to send you a hat, have you wear their hat. Dr. Manhattan says Steve Cohen's press conference back around the All-Star break in 2023 basically said the farm system needs to have talent. Cohen says he's not going to throw money to fix a problem that's not going to work. Steve knows what he's doing. Yeah, guys, I think it's time we trust Steve Cohen. I think there's really a lot of time. We got to trust Steve. We got to trust Stearns. And I know it's infuriating. Believe me, I get it. I get the frustration. The Mets have been everyone's signing someone and the Mets are sitting back. Again, I think moves are coming here. They have to be because the roster is nowhere near set. So this week, next week, I'd expect moves to start coming. And hopefully we have one to talk about on tomorrow's show on Mets Daily. Smash that thumbs up. Keep on commenting. Follow me at Jake Brown Live. Keep subscribing. Thank you for getting us to 3,000 today. We'll officially welcome in our 3,000 subscribers tomorrow. And maybe we'll do a giveaway on tomorrow's show. So make sure you stay tuned. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas. Thank you for watching Mets Daily. We'll talk to you tomorrow.